life?
Cool. That's a hard question. I enjoy doing almost every single translation that I've done. I really have had, I wouldn't say fun all the time, but it was always an interesting challenge. For example, The Engineered Human Souls has a particular set of challenges in that it covers three regimes, the Nazi regime and the communist regime, and then the experience of the author / main character in Canada. And so there were all kinds of different levels of language that had to be dealt with. It was a book that consisted of the narrator telling the story, then there were letters that were all written in different voices, and so it was a tremendous challenge, but it was really a lot of fun actually doing that. So I enjoyed that. What else? I mean, I really enjoy translating Havel's plays, and he's the only playwright that I've ever translated into English, although I'm thinking that there might be some other playwrights that I might try to tackle. But translating plays is a particular pleasure because at a certain stage, I do a first draft, or I work with my wife Patricia, who's an actor, I should say. And we then take it to the cast, or a cast, or a bunch of actors who then read the play, or sometimes perform the play. But in the process of rehearsal, we can make adjustments to the actual translation, and that's fun as well. My favorite translation, I think, of Shkredsky's is it's called in Czech Scherzo Cappuccino. In English we call it Dvořák in Love. And that was a novel that went through sort of a double transformation. I translated the original text into English. It's a series of related chapters narrated by different characters that jumps all over the place chronologically. So the first chapter starts with Dvořák being recruited to come to America in 1892 or 1893. The second chapter begins after his death, and the book jumps back and forth. And I have had the great privilege of working with a brilliant editor, Louise Dennis, in Toronto, who's the head of Knopf Canada now. She came up with she reshuffled the deck, essentially. And we sat down with Shkredsky and we said we wanted to change the order of the chapters around. And what happened was that book was transformed. I translated it from Czech to English, and then she transformed it from a Czech novel into an American novel, simply by moving the chapters around. So the book ends in the 1930s, and the English book ends in the 1930s. And it's really, when you read it, it's a book about the kind of the way in which Black American culture and European culture sort of came together, so that Dvořák then becomes the kind of an example of someone who inspires early Black Broadway musicals, who inspires Duke Ellington, and who is kind of like a progenitor of modern jazz, if you like. It's an amazing book. That doesn't come across when you read it in Czech, because the emphasis is different, right? So it's a fascinating book, and I wish that somebody, like Miloš Forman would make a great movie of it, because it would tell you it's a book that covers a forgotten aspect of American history, which is what happened to that generation of talented people whose parents were born in slavery, and who had enormous cultural ambitions for their children, and who managed to get them sent to these great conservatories in New York, and then who became part of the kind of mainstream of American popular culture, if you like. So anyway, that was a lot of fun. And translations of other Czech books. I'm going to talk about, just briefly, about the fate of the good soldier Schwig, because there have been several attempts to translate it. Oliver, who translated the uncompleted novel in the 1930s, I believe, and who cut a lot of it out. I mean, he just simply left a whole bunch of stuff out of it, and he didn't deal with the vulgarities very well. The second translation came out in the 1970s, and it was by former British ambassador to Prague, called Suzanna. I was going to say it was a bird. I thought it might have been partridge, but no, it's parrot. It's her Cecil Parrot, who translated the whole book, whose translation is absolutely, I would say, very diligent. But the book itself was written in conditions that, and this is something that we can talk about a little more. Translators and writers have, work in very different ways. Hasek wrote that book in a bar. He wrote that book, he ordered himself a beer, he sat down, he wrote a chapter, he sent it off to the printer. It came out as a serialized novel that he never finished. And so when you have a translator with a scholarly bent translating that book, you get a very exact translation, but there's something missing in the kind of spirit in which it was written. You see what I mean? Yeah. I still think that the definitive translation of Schweik has yet to be done. And I fantasize about an old age spent in a bar somewhere in Ireland, translating this thing, into some. I mean, I think the Irish history and the Irish sense of humor and Irish sort of slang is something that might actually work. I'm just fantasizing now, but that's a project yet to be done. And it doesn't necessarily have to be me who does it, but you heard it here first.
There's one more.
Yeah.
At least one more, right? I don't know of the first.
There's another one. That's right. But I don't know who did it.
I don't remember.
Yeah, they sent it to me actually, and I just didn't think it was very good. But I think they self-published it or found someone who published it.
It was right. It was
but I forget, it was years ago.
It was an attempt to do the kind of thing you're talking about, to loosen it up, it's a little bit less liberal, less literal, and making an attempt to find an equivalent in my. I think for me, knowing the Czech text in the back of my mind, I wasn't satisfied because I felt that that's not what it was.
But that's the whole thing. I mean, that is a really, really, really difficult. Hasek is incredibly hard to translate. And yet, when you read it in Czech, it reads very easily and it's funny, and so you sit down and you try to, even his short stories, because he just dashed them off, and you can't dash a translation. You just can't do it.
So do you have a favorite translation of your own and a favorite translation of someone else's?
My own, I'll do it quickly. I only translated one book, but the one I'm most proud of was my first published translation. It was amazing. Before I went off my own, I was the editor at Princeton Architectural Press, an architectural publisher, and there was a history that we published by a Princeton professor who, it was brilliant history. It was a bunch of essays about 18th century writers in which who had dealt with architectural themes, and some of them were architects, some of them were actually just writers with no architectural background. And it was this brilliant essay, but it was all these quotes from all these French writers. And the problem is that, two problems. One is that he couldn't translate. He just had no idea what to do with translations. And two, he didn't have the original text. So as an editor, I had to retranslate all of his translations without the original text. Wow. And throughout the whole book, I mean, it wasn't like I could look up a couple. It was over 100 translations and pieces of things. And I was very proud. I mean, I think they're wonderful translations. I have no idea if they're accurate, but they're really good translations.
That's a good achievement.
That was my first. That's what I started. So I didn't know French. Actually, one of the funniest things is we once got a blurb actually for Carl Chapek from Milan Kundera, but he didn't have what he had written in French. So a Czech writer, he wrote the blurb in French. It was published by a German publisher of Čapek. And so Peter Cusey and I, the Czech translator, translated it back from Czech from German into what we thought the French originally was, and then into English. So again, we were translating, and we were missing the French translation. So sometimes some of those fun translations are ones where you're actually missing the text. But that was very short, luckily. In terms of, I mean, it's really hard. I absolutely love his translation of Dvořák and Love. But he's already said that. By the way, Peter Cusey and they did publish a bunch of stories of Hašek a long time ago. There is one thing that's sort of interesting. If anybody wants to read a nice, I'm trying to remember the name of it. There's a very nice story by Karl Čapek about, it basically doesn't say his name, but it's about Hašek sitting in a bar and writing. And I forget, I think that's the one about the parrot, actually, isn't it? Yeah, it's the one. It's something about the parrot. I don't have it here.
Parrot? Not the dead.
No, it's this. It's this bet and stuff. It's very funny. Anyway, it has the word parrot in it, but it's not. It's long before parrot, the translator, came along. But some of these things do come together. But I was going to mention Peter Cusey, even if he was here, his translation of Karl Polacek's book, which we call What Ownership's All About. And it's the first and only time he's appeared in English in a book-length manuscript. And he's one of those authors that, unlike Joachim Topol, who you look at and you say, "My God, how are you ever going to translate this?" People always told me, you've got to publish him, but he's untranslatable. I sort of two different people. Usually, one person would say you have to translate Polacek. Other people would say, but you can't translate. You can't do it. And I thought Peter did an amazing job. There's a lot. One thing that's interesting about difficulty in translation is it comes in lots of different forms. It can come in something that's extremely complex. It can come in something like Yaroslav Seifert's poetry, which is extremely simple and extremely difficult to translate. And I also published a volume of that by Evald Ozers. There's been a lot of translation. He's another author that nobody's ever, that there's been a lot of unsatisfactory translations of. It's very simple and very hard. Polacek's different. I mean, it's not that complex, but yet it's very, very hard to bring across. And I thought Peter did an amazing job, and it's the thing he's least known for. Kundera is 10 times easier than Polacek.
Just one other thing I wanted to say about, going back to your question from before, Chris, was that the other thing about having the web is now there are other ways that people can read Czech literature. So I've done shorter things for websites. So I just did a story by Magdalena Placová, who's here tonight, for this online journal called Two Lines, which the Center for the Art of Translation puts out. So there are other ways now. You don't have to translate a book to but anyway. I won the American Literary Translators Association gave me this incredible National Translation Award for the Hulova, All This Belongs to Me. So that's great. But I will say definitely my favorite translation will probably always be City Sister Silver, because partly because of how long I spent with it, and Rob was with me through all. I think we went 2 drafts. We could have used a third, but it was 250,000 words. And to give you an idea, so this book is 80,000, and these are about 30,000. So it's long. And